Welcome back to Leaders Summit 2021, brought to you by UN Global Compact. It is midnight in New York, where Compact is headquartered, and it's midday over in Hong Kong, where I am. I'm James Chown, international moderator and host of the China Current, and your moderator today for this summit. Well, welcome back, or welcome in if you're just joining us. We've had a busy day so far and ready to keep that momentum and inspiration going hard. We want to hear from you, so as we've been reminding you periodically, join us on social media. You'll find us particularly active on Twitter and other platforms, and of course on the event website where you're watching us from. Our hashtag is Leaders Summit. We'd love to hear from you, what you're picking up on, what you love, what you're learning, and what you're experiencing in your interactions with your peer groups of leaders here at the Leaders Summit. Also remember that you can message each other, be they ordinary attendees or some of our guest speakers. You can find all those features embedded in the hop-in platform that you're using now. But as we said, we're just getting started, but we're going to shift the focus to South Asia, and we're going to look at these topics. Some of the words we may be familiar with, others we may not be as much: decent work, labor, and consumer rights. But of course, all of this is so important, especially if we're in private sector or in organizations that we lead. But we have the South Asia Network ready to share their experiences on this and to bring some of the color that we need to understand the issues at stake. We've got Dagmar, Director of the ILO Decent Work team in South Asia and India, leading us for us there. We've also got Seppo, who is, of course, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. Meanwhile, close by in Nepal, we have Nina Smith, who is the CEO of GoodWeave International. Then Krishan and Balendra, who is the chair of the John Keells Holding based out in Sri Lanka. And last but not least, over in Pakistan, we have Musadaq Zulqurnain, who is the chairman of Interloop Limited. So we can't wait to hear what they have to say. Keep watching for that. Know there's interpretation available. We told you about the social media, and we're going to be back in about an hour to go into our next plenary. So keep watching, keep going. And in the meantime, we're handing off to the panel to look at the South Asia issues there.
Esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Dhaka. A warm welcome to the distinguished panelists and leaders from business, government, the United Nations, and civil society around the world to this session, which is themed Towards Economic Prosperity, Perspectives from South Asia. And this is part of the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit 2021. I am Seppo. I'm the UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh, and I will be moderating this very important session today. Let me start by reminding you all that this year's Leaders Summit is organized at a time when there is a great need for great leadership. Leaders who provide strategic direction, leaders who take determined action. The Global Compact can play a big role in facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration, innovative thought leadership, transparency in reporting on progress, and data-driven initiatives. Partnerships are an important means of implementation to achieve the 2030 Agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In the spirit of renewing the UN system, there is a strong emphasis on partnerships in order to achieve these goals, and in particular, partnerships with the private sector. This session is co-hosted by the Global Compact local networks in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh. We have invited industry leaders to discuss issues on decent work and labor laws, and how South Asian economies can recover from the pandemic through fruitful collaboration between multi-sectoral players. Before we go to the keynote presentations and the panel discussion, allow me to highlight a few issues. In this session, we will discuss how South Asian countries can work together on post-pandemic economic recovery and how to create economies that are environmentally sustainable and inclusive. We are looking forward to hearing from the experts and the thought leaders on the panel how they navigate the changes and continued uncertainties and how they envision the world of work after the disruption to the labor market, to trade, and the devastation that COVID-19 has brought. Without any further ado, let me introduce you to the panelists. We have with us Dagmar Walter, who is the director of ILO's Decent Work Technical Support Team for South Asia and country office for India as a keynote speaker. Dagmar has over 20 years of career with ILO, and she has worked in several regions and duty stations across Africa, Europe, Americas, and now Asia. Her key areas of work include tackling employment and social protection challenges from the international labor rights perspective and shaping the future of work we want through effective social dialogue. Prior to her ILO career, Dagmar worked for international development and human rights in various capacities. We have with us Krishan Balendra from Sri Lanka. Mr. Balendra is a chairman of the John Keells Holdings. He is the director of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and the honorary council of the Republic of Poland in Sri Lanka. And he has a very long CV, and I will move to the other, where is this now? The other introductions. Apologies. We have with us Musadaq from Pakistan, who is the chairman of Interloop Limited, the largest apparel goods company on the Pakistan Stock Exchange. He also serves on the board of Karandas, a macrofinance organization sponsored by UK Aid and Melinda and Gates Foundation, among many other things of this distinguished speaker. And we also have Nina Smith, who is the founding Chief Executive Officer of GoodWeave International, the leading NGO working to stop child labor in global supply chains by bringing visibility to workers, restoring childhoods, and providing assurance to companies and consumers that select products with GoodWeave certification label are produced free from child labor. Before I give the floor to Dagmar, let me emphasize a few issues from my side. The first one is South Asia is home to around 29% of the world's extreme poor. That's approximately 216 million, according to the World Bank's Poverty and Shared Prosperity 2020 report. While social protection measures is needed to carry people over and cushion the impact of the pandemic, creating decent jobs is the most potent driver of poverty reduction in this region. In the last 70 years, we have seen the purchasing power in these economies grow, the domestic markets boom, creating new opportunities for businesses and a growing middle class. Second, the global pandemic has changed the world of work significantly, forcing a lot of service and knowledge work to go online, and this together and coming with numerous job losses. Governments and the private sector need to seize the opportunity of increased connectivity to accelerate economic development through equipping its citizens with the necessary skills to obtain decent and productive work. Governments, the private sector, and development partners have a crucial role to address the digital divide that we see within countries, between regions, and very much the gender digital divide. This is important to ensure that those new decent job opportunities that are created can benefit everyone. Due to the nature of the pandemic and its unprecedented consequences, the education and skills sector has had to do a rethink of their entire business models and curricula. The school to work transition in an already uncertain job market has increased the risk for the millions who have entered the job market during the pandemic. And finally, this increasingly digitizing economy has also brought a lot of challenges to the cottage and the micro and small businesses due to their lack of access to digital infrastructure and human and financial resources. The transition has been particularly hard on those who are in areas or in sectors that don't operate in the digital space. With those thoughts, I now give the floor to Dagmar for the keynote speech. Dagmar, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mia. Esteemed participants, partners of the UN Global Compact, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to join this virtual gathering and have this opportunity to discuss about the regional challenges and solutions on economic prosperity in South Asia with the eminent panelists here today. I'm keen to sharing initiatives and guidance by ILO from its centenary-long experience on promoting decent work, especially during the times of crisis. This event is held against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is a unique crisis, not just pressuring health systems of countries, but also rattled the labor markets across the region and the globe. The crisis has affected foreign direct investment and trade worldwide and continues to impact negatively on enterprises of all sizes and their workers and families. According to ILO probably I would say conservative estimates, South Asia saw a 13% drop of working hours in 2020, which is equivalent to 80 million jobs. South Asia, as a major supply chain hub, has been especially hard hit. Factory closures, falling consumer demand and supply chain bottlenecks continue to have ripple effects. Numerous multinational enterprises have faced market disruptions, and many are exploring ways to consolidate supply chains and reshore production, with significant implications for this region. The crisis has exposed especially those in the lower tiers, where micro and small enterprises and informal workers with less or no social security protection are concentrated. It is now time to unite in solidarity to support workers, communities, and companies affected by the pandemic. Employees and the suppliers are at the heart of competitive enterprises. Crises are also opportunities for introspection and transformation, not only to find ways to cut business operation costs, but also to innovate and promote responsible and sustainable business. The UN Global Compact call for a coordinated international plan involving the business sector will be critical for economic rebuilding from this pandemic. The ILO welcomes and echoes the UN Global Compact special plea and guidance to companies on upholding the labor principles and international labor standards. They are essential for realizing the labor rights of workers and for promoting decent work and inclusive growth in South Asia. The ILO, in partnership with workers and employers organizations, has been reaching out to workers in the informal economy, especially home-based workers, through capacity building programs to improve their access to social protection, training on COVID-19 preventive measures, wage determination, and grievance handling mechanisms. For migrant workers, we advocate for safe and informed labor migration, and we collaborate closely with recruitment agencies, employers, and governments to address the protection of migrant workers also in times of pandemic. ILO is taking all opportunities in support of a human-centered recovery in line with its declaration of 2019. We are also actively working in tandem with the UN system at the national, international level to ensure delivery of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and to promote all areas of multilateral cooperation in response to the COVID-19 crisis. It is my hope that despite the setbacks that the pandemic has brought about, governments and businesses remain committed to the realization of workers' human rights. In line with the International Year on the Elimination of Child Labor this year, we should all come together under the SDG Alliance 8.7 to unite forces tackling child and forced labor in this region and to use this as an indicator on how effective we are in our recovery response. So let me end here at this point, and I really look forward to the continued exchange with the esteemed panel members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dagmar, for bringing to the attention of the panelists a number of absolutely critical issues for the region and beyond, including the issue of labor migration and how it has been impacted by COVID. With that, esteemed participants, we're moving on to our distinguished panel. And I will first give the floor to Nina Smith, who is the founding Chief Executive Officer of GoodWeave International. She's also a long-time advocate for children's rights and an expert on addressing labor violations in manufacturing supply chains. Nina, would you be so kind and share with us your thoughts on why does child labor persist in textile marketing supply chains in South Asia, and how has COVID-19 impacted workers' rights and child labor? Nina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mia, and to UNGC for inviting me to this panel. And, you know, you and Dagmar have really set the scene very well for some of what I wanted to say. And, you know, child labor persists for many reasons. But when we're talking about global supply chains, one of the things that's important to know is that there's really a gap between how especially Western brands source these goods, sourcing the goods, are investing in labor rights and what the problems really are. And Dagmar referenced the informal workers that are involved in work, especially in the South Asia region. And most companies are doing factory audits at what we call a level 1, where, you know, the majority of the workforce may not even be present where they're applying these criteria. So I can give you an example. GoodWeave works with 180 brands around the world to assess their supply chains in a very deep way, looking at all of the outsourcing for the very reason that exploitative work conditions, especially child labor, exists in the kind of hidden parts of those supply chains. And so a few years back, we began working with a major global retailer who already had their own audit process in place. They told us they worked with 5 suppliers in South Asia to produce the rugs that they were selling. And when they began to work with us, we looked into their supply chain and found nearly 900 work sites separate from those 5, what they would call level 1 factories. And in those work sites, we found all kinds of labor issues and worked closely with that company to address those issues, to formalize some of those work sites and bring rights remediation and protection in those areas. And so I think one point is just that global brands really can do something about this by partnering with different kinds of organizations in country in the regions where they're sourcing. But the key is to get to the full supply chain, and that's a huge issue right now. If you look at the data on informal work in some of the countries we're talking about, you know, I think the ILO data would show that in most of the South Asian countries, the total workforce of those working in informality is probably over 80%. So there's no way we can be sourcing products and not be, you know, touching those workers. So I wanted to touch on the issue of COVID before finishing, is that that we had done an assessment after a few months after COVID hit. GoodWeave works in supply chains in carpets, home goods, and apparel. And we did a research to look at how the impacts were affecting these workers. And a lot of the points have already been made, but we saw extreme income disruption. 60% of those surveyed either completely lost their jobs or had a severe reduction. Increased forced labor risk due to increasing debts to employers, some probably unlikely to ever be able to pay off those debts. School closures, obviously, decreased incomes put children at risk. And in particular, we saw that women are impacted, women and girls are impacted more. I gave you the data point, 60% impacted with a severe income loss. When you look at just females, that number goes up to 85%. And same when you look at child labor. When we looked at the child labor increases in the research, girls were impacted more than boys. So, you know, those are the kinds of things we're seeing. And, you know, the pandemic is obviously not a predictable thing, but certainly the companies, both the global companies sourcing products as well as local employers, need to step in these circumstances and make sure we're addressing these issues, you know, that I raised to do with income loss, debt, and, you know, wage levels and other kinds of things. So I think that's probably enough just to sort of set the scene.
Thank you, Nina, for sharing those thoughts. I then move on to the next panelist, who is Krishan Balendra, the chairman of John Keells Holding in Sri Lanka. And I want to note that Krishan has also been working in investment banking, focusing primarily on equity capital markets, because I think this is relevant for the question. So building a bit also from what Nina was saying, Krishan, can you elaborate on the challenges in keeping up with customer rights trends in developing country context, and the challenge being ensuring supply chain transparency in order to provide customers with the information that they need to be making informed, sustainable consumption choices? And if you can situate that question specifically in the region, and possibly even think about whether there's any opportunities for greener, cleaner production coming from this pandemic situation. Krishan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. And also thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel. On the question, you know, I will talk about the direct experience that I have with the John Keells Group, where we deal with many consumer products. We have a carbonated soft drinks business, an ice cream business, and also the second largest grocery chain in Sri Lanka, supermarkets chain in Sri Lanka. So we deal with hundreds, thousands, actually thousands of suppliers. And increasingly, even in the context of a developing country like Sri Lanka, increasingly consumers are becoming conscious of the practices of suppliers. And it has become important to us to have as much transparency as possible in this area. So one way that we've got about it is by having a very robust supplier code of conduct, a supplier management framework, where we monitor suppliers across various criteria, labor practices that we just heard about, but also environmental practices. And in the regional context and in the Sri Lanka context, I think the other important point here is that a lot of our suppliers, big majority of our suppliers are SMEs. The larger suppliers generally follow the practices anyway, because they have recognized the need for that almost as a competitive advantage. But it is the smaller suppliers that need the education and need the guidance. So we have that framework. We work towards education through engagement with these multiple smaller suppliers, and we have regular evaluation. And as I said at the start, the transparency is important because the consumers are demanding this in an increasing way. In the pandemic environment, it has become more important to emphasize this, but surprisingly what we have seen is, because we have had this robust framework in place, most of our suppliers have managed to maintain the standards expected of them. There have been some impacts on investments that were planned, where in particular where sustainability is concerned, but overall they have adhered to the guidelines that we have expected of them. And one of the positives is that in this pandemic environment, the importance of sustainability has been greater simply to manage costs. So you have to maximize the resources that you are already working with, and also to minimize wastage. And I think we all realize that as a larger corporate in the country, that supporting the supply chain, we have seen the value of that in a pandemic environment. The engagement and regular dialogue that we've had with our suppliers has really paid off in this difficult environment.
Thank you very much. And I now move to the last panelist, Musadaq from Pakistan, who is the chairman of Interloop Limited. But let me also highlight that he is an ardent advocate and supporter of quality and affordable education for underprivileged children in Pakistan, as well as actively associated with the Citizen Foundation. Building on what Krishan was sharing from Sri Lanka, Musadaq, can you share with us some best practices, measures your enterprise has taken in combating the COVID-19 situation, and measures that you believe could be replicated in South Asia and maybe beyond? And if you want to pick up on some of these other more social measures that Krishan was mentioning as well, please feel free to do so. Musadaq, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mia and UNGC, for this very interesting and important topic to be discussed. Mia, what I think is that this pandemic has tested how organizations, you see, structure themselves. For Interloop, we have our core business is apparel and textiles, and our major production is in Pakistan. We do have some production in Sri Lanka also now. But we do also have businesses in dairy products, logistics, packaging. We now reap the benefits of being a business for purpose. So long ago, we decided that we'll be a business for purpose, and our aim will not be just to safeguard the interests of the shareholder, but we have to look after the stakeholders. And the stakeholders covers a lot of things. And that's what our mission was, to be agents of positive change for stakeholders and community by pursuing an ethical and sustainable business. Now, when we say sustainable, I think it is important that sustainability has to be taken in the total larger context. It is not just the planet's sustainability, it is the people, the communities, the prosperity, and everything comes into that. And if the organizations are working for that, pandemics like these can be challenging, but you can address them. If you are financially strong, if your values are strong, and it is in your DNA that you have to look after your people. You cannot just close your eyes just because the customers have canceled your orders and your labor doesn't have food on the table. It doesn't, you see, justify that we just close our eyes. And for that, the organizations have to be, you see, careful how they spend their money, how the cash flows are there. So when this pandemic hit, the first and foremost thing for us was to see that the 25,000 plus people who work for us, they have food on their table, they don't lose their livelihoods, their health and safety was important. Initially, the orders started going down, there were cancellations. Most of the good companies, they never backed out. They talked with the suppliers like us and found a common ground to see how to handle these things. But there were others, as we know, in the South Asia, there were a lot of cancellations, and force majeure was, implemented, and nobody cared about what's going to happen with all those poor people who already have maybe 1 or 2 meals in a day, and how will they look after their kids? So we decided that we are as far as possible, because we were not sure how long this pandemic is going to continue and how long the shutdowns will continue in the Western world where our products are sold. And after that, when there were lockdowns in South Asia and in all these parts of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, how long are we going to, be out of work? So we started, even before that, we started, pooling up the cash and stopped all non-essential spends, suspended all capex investments, so that we can have enough cash for our people to be, provided with the food on their table. And I'm very happy to report that we were able to do that, and we didn't let anybody go. We went down to 50% work. We let all the people who were above 50 years of age to stay home. We asked all the mothers who were bringing their children to our daycares to stay home, because if they would bring the kids to the work, it would be dangerous, and if they leave kids home, they can't come to work. So they were allowed to stay home. Everybody who was vulnerable, had some diseases, were allowed to stay home, and others were rotated in half shifts as per the SOPs of WHO, so that their safety measures are there. And we made sure that people who are not, obviously it had to be a collaboration between the customers, which are retailers and brands, us as the corporates, our employees who had to, also work for the sustainability, and the public sector, the government. And the government in Pakistan also helped with the, providing very low interest loans to pay the salaries if we don't let anybody go. So what we did was that we said that if you're not coming to work, you will still get 2/3 of the mothers who had their kids, they would get paid leaves without any discrimination. But everybody else who is not coming to work because we don't have enough work would still get 2/3 of their salaries at home, and all the benefits, which came to the 76% of their take home. And others who come to work will get food wages. And this really helped us, our people, to continue working, for us to continue, but their health and safety was made of prime importance. We created a central COVID control team. Then we designated a lot of medical teams comprising of doctors and paramedics who would provide advice to our people at their homes. The supplies were short in our part of the world. There were no oximeters available. People with very minor symptoms needed oximeters. So we procured a lot of bulk oximeters and provided oximeters to our people at home. These are very small things, but I'm just trying to point out, when you take care of your people, you consider that they are their responsibility, they give you back. And the sustainability can't go, it's not a one-way traffic. It has to go hand in hand. At the same time, we looked at the community and the small shop owners, small workers who were doing their daily wages, they were out of jobs in the market. So we provided millions of meals to the people who were at their homes, shut down. We provided a lot of PPE. We imported from China through our own offices to the hospitals which are short of PPEs. So all that, emphasized the importance of sustainability in the real sense, that a business of purpose has to go beyond just making money for the shareholders. and that goes a long way to, you see, the continuity of the business. I would also like to respond to the, I think, the points raised by the previous panelists and particularly by Nina. I think the issue of child labor and also the issue of inclusiveness is very important. There are two types of organizations. There are one type of manufacturers organizations who will do it as a matter of principle, not because the inspectors are coming in or everybody is watching. And then there are people who would, you see, like Nina said, that there will be factories which are inspected, and then there are some backdoor factories which are not inspected. I think while we have to make sure that organizations like GoodWeave and ILO and all those, they work together to improve the conditions, I think we also have to look up what are we going to do with those children who are breadwinners in this area. People have 7 and 8 children, and it is a negative incentive in South Asia to have more children, because a 10-year-old goes out and brings home for the some wages for the family, which is very unfortunate. So, but we have to put those kids in the schools. So that's for an organization like us. We have, with the help of a big, the largest not-for-profit organization, we have built 30 schools with millions of dollars, and they provide quality education to about 4,000 kids, half of them which are girls from underprivileged families, which would have never seen a school otherwise. So the organizations have to take the responsibility. And with my last point, I will finish my long talk, is that I think, again, in the consumer world, the retailers and the brands, I am sorry to say, there are two types of, you see, organizations. One who follow their values, and they want to follow their values. And there are others, and I am sorry to say, who will close one eye to buy a cheaper product. I think that is where the problem also starts. When I'm not trying to, you see, provide a justification for those companies who are using these facilities, these shady facilities, and using child labor and forced labor and all that. But I think these price pressures to buy things cheap is also causing that problem. I think the consumer has to build that pressure. And the organizations like GoodWeave and ILO have to provide those eyes. In this digital world, it's not now easy to hide your productions. I think it's easy. So we have all to work together to bring a better life to our children, to our people who really deserve a better life than what they have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for ending on that note, to also point to informed consumer choice, not only putting the responsibility on the production and the industry itself. We're going to do a second round, and I would ask all the panelists to try to stick to 3 to 4 minutes, so everyone will have a chance. And I'm starting with Dagmar. There's been a lot said, but one issue that we haven't really talked about is youth employment. So I would ask you to talk about your experience working on youth employment and kind of look at it in this particular situation. The school to work transition is going to be particularly challenging for millions of youth who have been, impacted. Their education has been impacted by the pandemic. What can be done on that? How do we make sure that in the changing world of works, the skills that youth have actually make them employable? And of course, that companies are able to attract fresh graduates with the relevant skills. So in this post-pandemic world, and we're sadly not yet in the post-pandemic world, but in this changing, shifting landscapes, how do you see your experience on youth employment coming in, and what are the pointers? What do we need to keep in mind? Dagmar, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. In fact, what we have observed also before the pandemic to some extent, but much more so now during the pandemic times, which last now over a year, is that young people, not in education, even employment and training, like what we call needs, that's also an SDG indicator, increase. And that shows that the transition from school to work becomes more and more difficult. And this requires for dedicated and concerted efforts where the actors of the labor market dialogue and collaborate with education institutions indeed. And yeah, we see this urgent need to enable youth to, enjoy lives of safety, dignity and opportunity, especially in this region. And I think that the private sector should join hands with government and training institutions to support the youth in basically achieving their fullest and greatest potential. Now, the ILO undertook last year research and published a report together with the Asian Development Bank. It was published in September 2020, just a few months ago. And here we called on governments in this region to adopt urgent and rather large scale and targeted measures to generate jobs for youth and to keep education and training on track. So among other, this report recommended also that job creation and placement schemes can offer immediate work opportunities to unemployed young women and men during the pandemic, because it's kind of, as we see, lasting. And while also maintaining exactly their work readiness through skills interventions. So it's basically a combination. And the private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders could mobilize to facilitate matching available employment opportunities with young job seekers, including through digital innovations, and can complement public employment services. So there's a complementarity really to have. And we need to focus on training. It is particularly critical when education institutions and workplace learning have been so severely impacted by COVID-19 crisis. With the use of online learning set to increase, expanding digital infrastructure and access will further transform also the labor market prospects. So we really see kind of that the actors have to come together and look at this kind of transformation. And in fact, we are saying, don't wait basically, right, till after the pandemic, but it is already now the time to act actually. And I should also emphasize what we have seen is that specific and special attention must be given to young women, as they have the highest probability of not get even into the labor force. So often they stay outside the labor force, or if they have gone into the labor force, they kind of drop out from the labor force quite soon. So that is a whole pool of often even, educated talent that is untapped to that extent. And then if I may, I just wanted to, a little bit reflect on what our representative here from Pakistan said. And I thought, extremely speaking examples of how in practice, they translated this dialogue, right, between the different actors, the companies, the workers, also how government supported companies to some extent, how, measures were jointly agreed. And this really speaks to also the kind of recommendations that the ILO brought out, how to tackle, the pandemic, the crisis, and also to be able to sustain work in a more resilient way. So I just wanted to echo that and really found that it was a great example of how it has been put in practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn Dagmar's point to say that businesses have a role to play and turn the question back to Musadaq. So what are the changes? What is the trends in terms of how the world of work is changing? There's a lot of references to the need for skills and reskilling, whether it's youth or whether it's migrants. And then there is the whole thinking around how do we make sure that that short window of the demographic dividend and the youth dividend in South Asia is not missed. So how do you see the private sector and businesses linking up with others to tackle these issues? Musadaq, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mia. I think it's a very interesting question. First of all, let's also see, as we have been discussing, the whole landscape is changing. And for the companies to become more efficient, I think there is going to be a drive for more automation. And at the same time, the companies will have to become more agile to respond to, you see, cyclic changes in demand, which now we are seeing because of the pandemic. And post-pandemic, I think this is going to stay with us for quite some time. So what does that mean? That means that there are going to be cycles of high demand and low demand, and you have to, the type of demands are going to change. You would probably, the companies are going to invest into equipment which would need lesser people for the same work. And if the company is not expanding, then that is adding to the unemployment. And because of the world, I think, is jumping by 2 to 3 years, leapfrogging by 2 to 3 years towards, you see, digital adoption. This pandemic, it was already moving towards that, but now I think it has leapfrogged by 2 to 3 years. And all that is also going to not only need new skills, it would need new infrastructure, the access to internet, the speed of internet, the you see, cost of internet. How many people would have in South Asia, where we have over 1.5 billion people, how many people will have access to that? So that has to be looked into. And then you see, that problem is, you see, further complicated in countries like Pakistan, where we have a youth bulge. We have, I am sure most of you would know, we have 64% of our population which is under the age of 30. And we are adding in Pakistan 3 million new young people to the workable age every year. At the same time, we are very low on inclusiveness. Only 22% of the workforce comprised of women. So our problems are much more, you see, complicated than even before the pandemic. And they're going to, so that the solution is that everybody has to work together. We have to work together, the private sector, the public sector, the international organizations, to, you see, address these things. We have to see what new educational qualifications are needed. We will need a lot of vocational training, even for the educated, to reskill them, to enable them to be digital savvy, to be able to work from home, to be able to provide. And South Asia will have to move also. It has been the, you see, the workhorse of the world. I think it has also to, you see, start adding more service sector, where youngsters can stay home, and the new, even new work spaces will have to be designed where people can come in and work. And you see, they can provide services to the world. We have a lot of educated youth who can be reskilled to do that. I think it is very important. At the same time, before I end, I think we'll need some affirmative action to, you see, enable more inclusiveness. Like in our company, for the last few years, we have made it mandatory that when we induct the fresh graduates, we induct about between 50 to 100 every year. We will have 50% allocation for the girls. So it's an affirmative action. Obviously it is not very well taken by the male population, because I think it has to be open, but I think we have to do that. We have to provide we have to understand the family problems of the women working in South Asia. They sometimes have to leave their jobs because of the family pressure. So many companies, like international companies, are doing that, and we have done that. That we have a reconnect policy. If a girl has to leave the job because her husband is moving somewhere else and she can't work, or something else, she can reconnect anytime. If she has not left for commercial reasons, she has left for personal reasons, she can reconnect anytime in her life to come back. Things like those. We have to give them extended benefits for when the childbirth comes in. So this will bring more inclusivity. So I think these are the things which we have to take into account to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for also noting the issue of the unpaid care burden, which certainly is one of the pandemic consequences, but also was there a lot before the pandemic. Let me turn to a slightly different issue and ask Krishan, if you could please talk to us a little bit more about sustainable supply chains, and in particular the issue of plastic pollution, one of those burning urgent issues in terms of this being the year of climate, which hopefully will lead to a decade of climate and some real action. And plastic pollution will become a customer rights focused area. It will probably also become really the issue for informed and sustainable consumption, and therefore stakeholder demand. Can you share with us some of the practices and how you see this evolving in terms of tackling plastic pollution? Krishan, you have the floor.
Yeah, I would say that plastic pollution is probably the #1 priority on the supply chain, and the #1 focus of the consumer on sustainability. And like any other country in the world, and particularly I suppose in developing countries, plastic pollution is a big issue. And as an island, actually in Sri Lanka, the coastal pollution is a big issue, because that's just not the pollution from Sri Lanka, but the amount of plastic items that get washed onto our beaches from other countries, from far distant countries as well, is a big problem. Now, the main question here, and we as a group have tried to address that, is to create awareness. And we have a project called Plasticycle, where the main focus is to create awareness through campaigns across the island, and also to develop a mechanism for collection. And we are working with some other corporates for collection and use and recycling of plastics. We have today about 250 collection points, mainly in and around Colombo, where we have these see-through bins in our supermarkets, on the highways, and that has been quite a success in encouraging recycling, where plastic items are deposited there by the general public. In our businesses, in every business, this has been a priority focus for our sustainability initiatives. I will talk about a couple. The supermarkets, of course, is probably the biggest culprit, if I can call them that, and any supermarket business anywhere in the world, with the plastic bags and the plastic packaging. We were the first supermarket chain in Sri Lanka to publicly commit to reduce plastic usage, and we have made a commitment to reduce our plastic usage by 50% by 2025. And these initiatives include bringing your own bags, having paper bags, using paper straws, other forms of packaging, and also creating awareness at the store level. We even give extra loyalty membership points if you bring your own takeaway bag instead of using the plastic bags. Similarly, at our hotels, a number of initiatives where again, there is a lot of plastic usage. So we've introduced reusable glass bottles, plastic straws, and generally work towards creating awareness with the staff and the guests. I can go on about the other initiatives, I don't want to, but I think, as I said, it is the #1 focus for sustainability in a country like Sri Lanka. And I think it is the case all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krishan. And thanks for again drawing that link between making it easy for the consumer, while at the same time also raising awareness in terms of making the right choice easy to make. Going now back to Nina as the last panelist to comment. Nina, as an activist and talking about child labor, it is often a narrative about all the do nots and pointing to issues of concerns and areas that needs to be tackled. Can you turn that narrative around and share with us some of the promising developments that you have seen and some of the models that you can really point to as working, coming out of the work that you're doing with GoodWeave? Nina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mia. And yeah, I mean, before the pandemic hit, we really felt like we were seeing so much momentum. I'm sure Dagmar can attest to that, you know, we had seen over a 20-year period, I think about a 40% reduction in child labor globally. And so, you know, the pandemic really has been a setback. But I will say that I mentioned we work with so many companies, not just buyers, but sellers, you know, probably 500 companies in our network. And they have responded, they have stepped up in all kinds of ways. And just to address Musadaq's point about the importance of supporting education, not just surveilling and pointing out problems, all of these companies are working together with us on our model, and that means companies in Nepal, India, as well as the US and all over the world, because part of what they do is by participating with us is pay fees that are invested in not just remedy to individual victims of child labor, but also we invest those resources into preventative programs that focus on getting all of those children into school, not just those that are identified in the supply chain, but in adjacent communities across the worker communities. And the issue of partnerships have come up several times in this panel. And really, that can't be done without a coming together. You know, companies need ground organizations that are there to help link up the communities to the government programs, to help facilitate bridge schooling, to mainstream children into government education. So there's a lot of really good work happening, both sort of within our own GoodWeave community, where there's so much collaboration going on between companies, us as a global NGO, local NGOs, and government, but many other models. And I think it's also really important to note that not just those here on this panel, there's a lot happening in the private sector, with even in big multinationals right now. And I, as someone who's been cynical about CSR, I think that there's really a shift in what's happening, and it's very important. So those are a few points. And one of the things, though, that I really wanted to mention, well, I should add, just since Krishan talked about the role of consumer, we really are seeing a shift in that as well. So I think there's sort of a perfect storm of momentum, and the most important thing right now, I feel, especially in response to the pandemic, but was happening anyway, is that all over the world you're seeing really a major policy shift. So especially in the market countries, there are laws coming online focusing on child labor due diligence. In the Netherlands, the child labor due diligence law, there's mandatory human rights laws coming online. Some of them are only proposed, some of them have already been ratified, some of them are starting to be implemented. They're in all phases, but really many may know about what's happening in the EU around mandatory due diligence. Well, what does that mean? That means that companies that previously could continue doing business despite the fact that in both production and consumption countries, there are laws against the use of child labor, they can still do business and get away with it, right? Well, that's really starting to change now. And I think it's really, really huge. So in the US, there was a kind of an obscure closing of a loophole called the consumptive demand loophole in the 1930 Tariff Act, which basically allowed companies to continue to source products made by child labor if those were the only available supply of the product. So, you know, despite the fact that it was illegal broadly to import those goods. And so since in the past, I believe the past 6 months alone, the US government has stopped over 370 shipments coming in to the country because of suspicion of forced labor, including child trafficking. And that's really huge. That is different than what has happened before. And so the business case, literally the business case for stopping the use of exploitative child labor, adult labor is there now, because what does it mean? I mean, there are business people on this panel, they know if the company can't pick up their goods and sell them, or the goods get destroyed in customs, then, you know, there are major losses, not just reputational losses. So I think it's really exciting that this is now happening, and we'll see more momentum.
Thanks, Nina, and thanks for ending on that optimistic note despite it all. So, esteemed participant, ladies and gentlemen, and to the panel, this has been an incredibly rich conversation. I think it's clear that we are looking at setbacks caused by the pandemic, which cannot be denied, but we are also looking at shifts, and shifts, if they are capitalized on, that can help us get to a more inclusive, sustainable recovery. I like the calls for adaptation, for innovation, and for recognizing that enterprises need to be agile, as do we, whether we are working for civil society or we're activists or with the UN, Global Compact partners, that agility is key. Business for purpose, social entrepreneurs, consumer choices are something which is clearly changing and shifting. Higher awareness around production change, sourcing chains, and of course, as Nina pointed out, what are the labor conditions, what are the child rights and labor rights concerns. Rich conversation around what have companies done to adapt to the pandemic, to cushion the impact of the pandemic, to make sure that they protect communities and their enterprise kind of ecosystem. The examples from both Pakistan and Sri Lanka were extremely interesting. I think linking changing consumer choices and looking at sustainable supply chains, the emphasis on fighting plastic pollution, very much reached by the experience that Krishan shared from Sri Lanka. Let me really highlight the issue of women, whether it is the unpaid care burden following from the pandemic and pre-pandemic, whether it is the increased challenges around the school to work transition, whether it is dropout from the labor force, or whether it is trying to keep cottage and micro enterprises alive. On all of these areas, it's particularly challenging for women. And I think that is something that needs to be very intentionally taken into account when we look at recovery planning. The second thing I wanted to emphasize, which has been mentioned in various forms, is the risk of a digitizing world and digitization becoming that new frontier of inequality. Whether it is capacity to use telemedicine, whether it's the gender divide in terms of digitization, whether it's access in remote areas, whether it's education and whether digital learning really can reach everyone, or whether it is businesses who lack a digital identity and who have a problem linking up with the digitizing economy. We have to make sure that digitization doesn't leave anyone behind. What I think is clear from what the panel has said is we will face a rocky road to recovery. But if the Global Compact partners, if governments, if businesses, if the private sector, if UN and development partners all work together, then we have a better chance of actually capturing some of those shifts, capturing some of the momentum, cushioning the impact of the poorest of the poor, and trying to carve out that path to a more sustainable and inclusive recovery. So with that, an enormous, huge thanks to Dagmar for an excellent keynote address and comment. Huge thanks to Nina for your insightful comments around child labor. A very big thanks to Krishan for sharing the experience from Sri Lanka, an island nation which obviously has also its own challenges because of that, and your very insightful comments around the environment. And a huge thanks to Musadaq for sharing with us how is pandemic impact being tackled in Pakistan and that broader social impact of it. With that, thank you all for joining. Thanks to all the panel members and thanks to everyone who has listened in. Thank you. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Great.